Okay, Dr. Kruger. Very nice for you to come here to give you the interview today. The first question I'm going to ask you is, can you tell me how do you get to know Venerable Hui Li?
Well, my acquaintance with Venerable Hui Li goes back to the early 1990s, when I had the joy of meeting him in connection with the establishment of the African Buddhist Seminary.
Can you tell us your involvement with African Buddhist Seminary in South Africa?
Yes, from the beginning, my first involvement was with the working out of curricula for the African Buddhist Seminary, for the training of monks. At the time, the South African government introduced a new system of national education, and they had certain requirements concerning curricula, for example, outcomes-based education, it was called. So that was my specific contribution, and at the time I was invited to become a lecturer at the African Buddhist Seminary in Buddhist history and philosophy. So I enjoyed that tremendously. I always found it a great privilege, really, to be able to tell young African people who had no formal knowledge of Buddhism, to tell them of Buddhism and to see their minds and their hearts warm and open to Buddhism.
Thank you. Well, Buddhism was absent in Africa for thousands of years. Do you think Africa is ready for Buddhism? Will Buddhism prevail in Africa? And if yes, then why?
Yes, I think all people in all cultures at all times need the message how to overcome their greed and their hatred and their ignorance. So I think African people would be very receptive to the Buddhist teaching. And then what makes it particularly interesting is the fact that there are certain points of possible contact between Buddhism and traditional African worldview and religion, so that those things might be developed in future. For example, the African idea of Ubuntu, that people are interrelated, and furthermore that nature consists of a life force. Everything is interdependent with everything else. So that sort of thing, I think, resonates very well with the Buddhist teaching. Although I must say, I think in bringing the teaching of Buddhism to the continent of Africa, it's not like bringing a bucket full of sand, some lifeless substance like sand or water, and just dumping it. It's more like planting a tree. So the people who bring the message, the people who receive the message, and the teaching itself are all three living organisms. So it's a process, a very subtle process of mutual understanding, mutual interpretation, of growing. So this could take a long time. If we look at China, for example, for Buddhism to really settle and take root in China as Chinese Buddhism did not happen overnight. So what we need in Africa, I think, is strategic thinking, a great deal of compassion, human understanding, and patience, I would say. I think those are the things that are really necessary. I think the main strategic issues at the moment are the presentation of the essence of Buddhism in the African idiom, African terminology, in terms of African culture. Secondly, I think a main strategic aspect is organization, networking. The Sangha, in the sense of monks and nuns, the Sangha is not a given in traditional African culture. So it's a novelty. And there too, it may not take root overnight. So that really has to be nourished, with great skill. But apart from that, I think the nourishment, the empowerment of the Buddhist laity in Africa is an issue of great importance. And thirdly, I would say art and ritual. African people have an enormous capacity for artistic expression. They have an enormous love for ritual. So those are the things that need to be developed over time. And I think it's a matter of, as I said, of both parties really understanding one another and working together. In the end, eventually, it will have to be an African undertaking. They will do it the way they think best. But what should be done, what could be done, is to provide the confidence, to provide the material, to provide the history and the whole sense, the aura of Buddhism. So given those factors, I think I see a prospect that Buddhism should be able to establish itself and to find its footing in Africa.
Great. Venerable Hui Li have said that he brought one of the world's oldest culture, which is Chinese culture, to Africa. And he also brought one of the oldest religion, Buddhism, to Africa. Now, these two cultures are all very foreign to African culture. What do you think the challenges that we face that when these multiple culture meets?
I think there are perhaps three main problems, but those problems are also opportunities, challenges, as you say. The first one is knowledge. I think a lack of communication often rests on the fact that people don't have sufficient knowledge. And it works both ways. So I think a knowledge of the great Chinese civilization, we're talking thousands of years here. So an understanding of that, a sense on the side of African people of information, a sense of Chinese culture and civilization. Also, people who work in Africa for the benefit of Africa in a Buddhist context, I think also need to know, get to know as well as they can, African culture, African sentiments, the African outlook on life, African problems. So information, and I think what I've been teaching at the Buddhist Seminary here, one leg of it was Buddhist history. So I think that's, I always sense that to be an enormously important aspect of what I should be doing. And that is to widen the horizons, to bridge that gulf in this, merely in the most basic sense of providing information of the larger context. The second one, I think, a most important basic fact is understanding of what people mean. And that means love and sympathy for people. So I think once one can mediate between Africa and, let's say, the Chinese presence, so that African people can understand what Buddhists intend and what Chinese people intend, and vice versa. We should base our work on a real desire to understand the framework, the frame of reference, and what African people. So I think that's a second aspect. And a third one that I would want to lift out is the sense of belonging to one large human family. If we break down exclusivistic walls of misunderstanding and establish gradually a sense of belonging together, as fellow human beings.
Thank you. Honorable Hui Li said about the orphanage he setting up in Africa. He said, food and clothes doesn't bring future to the children. Only education and opening their minds can bring hopes and future to them and to Africa. Can you tell us about your opinions on this topic?
Yes, I think looking at Africa at the moment, I would say there are practical problems, and there are what one might call spiritual problems. The practical problems are immense, as we all know. There are economic problems. There's enormous poverty. There are serious health problems in Africa. There's HIV/AIDS, there's TB, and so forth. With that come serious social problems, breakdown of families. And I think orphanages fill that need. Young people in Africa, children, are in need of material, physical, medical help. But apart from that, there's also a level of problem in that traditional cultural values and traditions are in the process of breaking down. They've been doing that for decades, even centuries, since colonialism came into the picture in the African context. So traditional values, and there is a kind of vacuum almost. So what we see, unfortunately, is exactly what we observe in other parts of the world. Young people turning to materialism, to a hedonistic kind of lifestyle, thinking that material goods, that money and so forth can provide the answer to their real spiritual requirements. So there is a need for a general empowerment of people in Africa, providing of skills, of education, which in the long term is probably the best solution to all problems. So I think the orphanages provide a unique opportunity to provide the sort of immediate help that's required, and also to provide the emotional support, and eventually, of course, all people, also the people of Africa, as human beings, need religious fulfillment, spiritual fulfillment. And I think Buddhism, with its unique message, can do an immense contribution. So Buddhism, and we're talking about Chinese Buddhism specifically, I think can offer a great deal for the requirements of Africa at the moment.
Thank you. Now, what part of Buddhist wisdom or teaching would be most applicable to the suffering of our African people now?
Well, I see Buddhism as a whole. It's an organic whole, so everything is related to everything else. But I would say that a bodhisattvic existence, the the ability, the willingness, the commitment to live as a bodhisattvic person in Africa, to be for Africa. I think that's a particularly important message coming from Buddhism. The compassion it involves, the human understanding it implies. I think that's a major contribution of Buddhism. Then, at a more practical level, I think skillfulness. The skill how to do what, when, that one's interventions, one's contributions, one's support should be intelligent, it should be understanding, it should be in terms of what people require as they present themselves, in terms of how they understand their own situation. So under no circumstances, I think, should Buddhism be simply dumped or simply presented to people. It's such a lovely message, deserving to be brought with a great deal of skill, a great deal of understanding and love, real love for Africa.
Great. Thank you so much. Do you want to add anything to it, to today's interview?
No, except perhaps express my optimism, express my hope for Africa, and my appreciation, and my very, very best wishes for Master Hui Li. It's a great privilege to know him, and I have a great admiration for him.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.